Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So recently on our daily radio program, we had a Republican candidate from South Carolina. And the interesting part to me was he was running on the platform of restoring trust in government. And I got to be honest, I found it a little bizarre coming from a Republican that they want to restore trust in government, since it seems to me the Republican Party has done their best over the last 30 plus years to destroy our trust in our government. So for me, that is a laudable goal, and I wish him well. I wish he will bring his party somewhere back to sanity. And overall, we need to be taking back our government. And this November, so very important to get out and vote, to get out and begin taking some of this back. And for me, it's about the elections. It's about, who we put into those offices. And one of the races that I'm watching really closely now that Paul Ryan has moved into retirement is California's 22nd Congressional District, the home of Devin Nunes, as you know, the House Intel chairman and, late night Trump runner. And here to talk about the campaign out there in California's 22nd, I've asked Andrew Jantz to come talk with us. He's the Democratic candidate running in the primary. Andrew, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me on.
So, I'm getting this sense that that race is heating up out there, as you guys look like now the number one race in the country.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We are really getting national attention. I think it's for a number of reasons. Obviously, Nunes is making a fool of himself in the district in Washington. He's working every day to undermine the special prosecutor's probe into the Russia meddling. But at the same time, we're running a really good campaign here on the ground. It's a grassroots campaign, and we have a ton of volunteers out there working for us every single day. And it's something that's new to this region, but it's really exciting, and it's so good to see so many people wanting to get involved in elections for the first time really in a long time.
No, and you're seeing that all across the country, people who have never been involved in the political process stepping up and stepping forward. Now, I look at your opponent as someone who, I got to be honest, I don't have a lot of faith in. Not a lot of trust there given the past, especially when you're talking about sensitive classified information running back and forth to the White House. And now this shenanigans with, I guess we're going to go after Attorney General Sessions because they want unredacted, information. I got to be honest, again, I feel someone I don't know, just not comfortable with it.
Yeah, it's funny. The national media had reported this past week that Nunes hadn't read any of the documents that he was requesting from DOJ. And so now he's asking for additional documents we know he's not going to read. So we don't really know what the point of all of this is. I think that he's working every single day to try to get into Trump's good graces and maybe, try to get a spot on the Trump team. He was part of the transition team. He worked closely with Michael Flynn. And, it's really disappointing to see that people like Nunes are out there every day really criticizing federal law enforcement agencies, the FBI, real key institutions in our form of government that haven't been politicized before. And it's really working. And I think it's a disservice to what we stand for as a country.
Yeah, I'm with you. Now I look at his record outside of this. This aside, his record on working class issues has not been all that stellar. His healthcare vote, someone who stands against raising the minimum wage. There's a whole bunch of things that I see as working class issues that he's on the other side of. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm so proud to be endorsed and supported by a number of labor organizations here in the district and statewide, some national organizations as well. And so I'm really working hard every day to make sure that folks who want to work are able to make a living wage. And then even beyond that, having the type of health care that is necessary to make sure that their families, when they get sick, that they're taken care of. And so we see that Nunes has taken millions of dollars from corporations and corporate PACs, and these are the special interest groups that really fund his campaign. I'm raising a ton more money in district than he is. His contributions come from these organizations that are out of state, and they're the ones that really own him at the end of the day, the organizations that want to put a stop to what working class Americans want and what the labor organizations are fighting for every day.
Let's talk about healthcare for a second, because the Republicans have really, in my view, done a masterful job of of really harming the ACA. With all of its problems, it still was better than the pay or die schemes that we see coming out of the Trump administration. I'm curious, if you're elected, what direction do you go with healthcare? How do you fix the problems that we have? How do we make sure that we get people covered?
You know, as a starting point, we need to recognize that healthcare is a fundamental human right, and I don't think that a lot of people do that when they begin having this debate. And you're right, the Affordable Care Act did a lot of good things to expand coverage to millions of Americans all across the country, particularly ones that have significantly less income than those who have been able to afford healthcare before. And so we need to make sure that we stabilize our existing markets. There are things that we can do now to make sure that we drive down the cost of prescription drugs. But in the long run, I think that we need to look around and see what other developing nations are doing with their healthcare systems that function way better than ours, and they have better outcomes, and they spend less as a percentage of GDP on healthcare. And so I want to make sure that we fix what's wrong with the Affordable Care Act. I think that that's a good starting point. But, you know, in the long term, we got to look at other options.
Are you on board with the idea of a Medicare for all system, a single payer type system? Are you advocating for any of that?
Look, Rick, I haven't committed myself to a particular plan yet. It's something that I'm open to looking at. But I think that if we go in a different direction with respect to healthcare, we need to have hearings. We need to open it up to the public. We need to have people come in and testify and give their opinions as how we're going to pay for some of these programs, and at the same time, how it's going to be implemented.
Wow, what a novel concept, actually opening things up to the public, having hearings, you know, doing things like we used to.
Absolutely. You know, with the Affordable Care Act, there were hundreds of hours worth of hearings, and we even let Republicans make amendments to the Affordable Care Act. Many of them actually passed into law. Unfortunately, many Republicans didn't vote for that piece of legislation, even though they were able to sort of water it down.
But hold on, Andrew. It was rammed down our throats. Did you get the memo? It was the ACA was rammed down our throats, much like that tax bill that they brought out here recently.
Yeah, well, you know, the tax bill was written behind closed doors by special interest groups and lobbyists. And I know that my opponent didn't even take the time to read it before he voted for it.
Let's talk about that for a second, because what we've done is, it appears to me, and you can disagree, is we have given a couple of $1 trillion away to, you know, big corporations and the very wealthy, and almost none of it has trickled down to the rest of us. And I view it as just a large theft of our treasury and a theft of educational opportunity for the future, a theft from our infrastructure and investments in the future of our country. I'm curious what your view is.
You know, I think that there's nothing wrong with tax breaks. I think the priorities were all screwed up in this discussion. I mean, the discussion should be around how do we help working class Americans, how do we help small businesses, and this tax plan didn't do anything for those individuals and for those small businesses. And so we really see that the reason for that is that these corporations in Washington they're really buying politicians. And so I've taken a pledge not to take any corporate money, any corporate PAC money. And we got to set an example for other people that are running for office, other lawmakers in Washington, that you can't be owned by major corporations, because if you are, you're going to go to Washington and you're going to vote their way on every single issue. And you know, with respect to what you had said about the trickle down effect, I mean, it's something that has been proven not to work over the years. You know, the people that were promised you know, trickle down economics in the Reagan era is still waiting for that wealth to trickle down to them, and it's 30 years later.
Yeah, I've been saying that, you know, they sold us rivers of gold and honey, and it's yellow, but it isn't gold or honey. But you know,
you had Marco Rubio out there, you know, being interviewed by The Economist, and he said that this did little or nothing to help working class Americans, and I think that's very telling.
I think it's very interesting that he's come out with that. But here again, as you've pointed out, we've already known this. This is one of those things that we already knew. And I predicted before they rammed it through in 50 plus days, a massive piece of legislation. If you want to talk about ramming something down someone's throat, that was rammed down our throat.
Absolutely. I agree. You know, we need to have open hearings. We need to go back to having a transparent system. And really, this goes back to how you started your segment today. We need more Republicans like the one that you interviewed to step forward and say that we need to send good people to government, which is part of the reason why I'm in this race. You know, my opponent is somebody that really represents everything that's wrong in Washington. And so as a prosecutor here in my district, someone that is sworn to uphold the law and high ethical standards, I think that that provides a stark contrast to what we have now. The people in my district are ready for a change, and that guy, the person that you had interviewed earlier, is right. We need to send good, ethical people to government because we don't have that now in Washington, especially with this Trump administration.
Well, let me ask you this then, because we are in a really highly polarized moment. How do you begin to bridge some of that gap that you may have ideological differences with? How do you, for the good of the country, how do we solve some of the big problems? Because it seems like today, Andrew, that we're in our polar opposite camps, and never shall we meet.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm doing here in the district when I'm talking to voters, and by the way, I talk to all voters. I talk to Republicans and Democrats, and I tell them that we need to start putting our country over our parties. And I've made it a point to point out some of the differences that I have with my own party. Here in my district in the Central Valley and in California, you know that Democrats control the legislature, and we have a number of members of Congress that are from California that are sent to Washington. We really need help here in the Central Valley. We need infrastructure projects, and those projects haven't been coming here to the Valley despite Democratic leadership in Sacramento and in Washington at some points. And so I've been very critical about us being able to get help from our own party. But at the same time, when I'm out talking to folks, talking about jobs and the economy and healthcare and immigration reform, water here in particular for our region, those are bipartisan issues, and we can come to agreements on these things. And I think the people of my district are really ready for us to get over this partisan divide that's splitting the rest of the country.
Yeah, I used to be able to agree with you on that. Infrastructure used to be, back in the day, something that was nonpartisan. It just seems like now we can't even get that, because I think everybody agrees we have a massive infrastructure gap. I think the American Society of Civil Engineers put it at about $4.3 trillion of need right now just to get us even. So the fact that you have infrastructure problems in your neighborhood doesn't make you alone. The entire country is struggling, because what used to be a bipartisan, we should be doing kind of thing has turned into polar opposite, butting heads, and then nothing getting done. Because here we are, we've got a president ran on $1 trillion infrastructure bill. Nothing's gotten passed.
Yeah, Rick, I really blame that on leadership in the House and in the Senate. This is actually one area that, you're right, we can work with the President of the United States on. I think that if we're able to win back control of the House and the Senate, we'll send the president an infrastructure bill, and he'll probably sign it.
I hope so, because we need it. We need the jobs. We need the infrastructure. And I often point out, not a huge Thomas Friedman fan, but he had a great quote a couple of years back. He said he had gone from Beijing to LAX, and it was like going from the Jetsons to the Flintstones. And sadly, that's all across this country. Now on the polar divide issue, because there are certain things that we have to take a stand on. What's the issue that Andrew Jans? What's the hill you die on? What's the issue you go, there's just no compromise here, or is there any?
Well, for me, locally here in the Central Valley, a big issue for us is immigration reform. And so one of the groups that are being targeted by the Trump administration are Dreamers. And Dreamers are a group of people that I have supported for years. As a young college student, I went out there and I marched on behalf of Dreamers. I worked with folks in the California legislature to get the California DREAM Act passed, which can be a model that we can use for the rest of the nation. And I believe about 80 to 85% of Americans agree that these folks who pay taxes, that are law-abiding, many of whom serve in the military, they deserve a pathway to citizenship. So I will not use the DACA recipients or the Dreamers as a bargaining chip for Trump to get his wall to nowhere. And I think that is one of the more principled areas that I'm not willing to compromise on.
Are you pro-wall, anti-wall, don't care wall? Where are you on the wall?
Look, let me tell you, I'm a prosecutor, and so I see the illicit drugs and contraband, weapons and guns, and the human trafficking and the sex trafficking. They all go through our legal points of entry, and that's where we actually need stepped-up security. You look at the 9/11 hijackers; they came through legal points of entry, and so that's really where we need stepped-up security. I don't think that we need a physical wall across the Southwest. It doesn't make sense. And by the way, Donald Trump said that someone else was going to pay for it. Let's hold him accountable to his promise to the American people. If he wants to build that wall, let's not put it on the backs of taxpayers. This wall, the money that he wants to spend on this wall could feed 1,000 homeless veterans for 10 years. And so what are we doing? The wall is really a scare tactic to scare people into voting for people like Donald Trump and people who try to promote his agenda.
Yeah, and if you look this week, Donald Trump actually asked Congress in bringing back rescission to cut CHIP funding to help pay for his excessive spending. And it just, again, it shows the priorities of this administration. Last line of questioning I've got for you, because I got to talk about jobs and about labor. We've got an assault on labor unions going on in this country. The Janus versus AFSCME case, I expect to go the wrong way out of the Supreme Court. There will be an attack on organized labor. How do we protect working people in the 21st century, especially those in the gig economy?
This is where we need to get people involved. I think after 2016, people started to understand that our elections have consequences. And one of the biggest consequences of people not showing up to the polls in 2016 is that we have now a president who has the ability to to appoint Supreme Court justices that aren't friendly to our labor organizations. And you're right, this Janus decision is going to be devastating for a lot of our labor organizations. But we need to make sure that we continue to be out there on the streets and protesting. Look at places all around the country in Oklahoma, Arizona this past week. We have teachers out there that are advocating for better working conditions, which we know translate into better learning conditions for students. And so these labor organizations have a big hill to climb, but they got to continue to be out there front and center, showing their membership and showing the people that they represent that they do have good outcomes when people organize and fight together and stand together.
Good stuff. Last line here. Make the case. Why Andrew Jans? Why you?
Look, this is going to be one of the most important elections in a generation, and there is no person in the House of Representatives that stands closer to Donald Trump than Devin Nunes. And so what we need to do is make sure that we win control of the House of Representatives so we can begin to unwind and unravel all of the terrible things that have been happening over the course of the past year. And that fight runs through California with a number of seats here that are going to be up for grabs, seats that voted for Hillary Clinton, and then obviously through Congressional District 22, the district that I'm running in, because we got to take out Nunes. He is the embodiment of everything that's wrong in Washington. And if we defeat Nunes here, somebody that stands close to Trump, it sends a signal to other Republicans that are running around the country for the United States Senate and for Congress that if you stand with the president, you're going to lose your seat.
There you go. The website, Andrew Jans for Congress. Andrew, I wish you the best. I hope you come back and talk to us again real soon.
Rick, that was great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Always good talking with you, our friend Andrew Jans. Again, check out his website, andrewjansforcongress.com. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Love to hear your thoughts. What election are you paying attention to? What race is important? Love to hear it. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week.